What's that? No.
All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Alyssa Karpenka, and I am the event coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon. This event is coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis Nations. Just to note that this event is being live streamed to our YouTube page, so please be aware of the webcam behind you. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of A Moment of Clarity by Fran Eldridge, published by your Nicholsworth Publishing. Thank you to Fran for being here tonight, and to Heather Nicol for working with us to create this event. I'll tell you a bit about our guest this evening. Throughout Fran Eldridge's career as a registered nurse in labor relations, and finally starting her own business growing and selling culinary herbs, her desire to write remained fervent. Fran's fictional short stories are based loosely upon her experiences growing up in rural Nova Scotia, as well as encounters she's had as an adult. The settings for her stories range from Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Nova Scotia to the territories. I will now turn things over to Fran. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you guys so very much. I must confess, I'm really overwhelmed that all you folks, this is wonderful. I am excited about tonight. And Leah said to me, don't be ad-libbing, read what I have on the paper. So I do want to welcome you all so very much. And all those out in, what's it called, online land, okay? Yeah, now, and I'm quite convinced, looking at the amount of people in this room, and I'm living again, aren't I? There must be thousands up there with this. And I do have so many people to thank, but I wanted to set that aside for now. And at the end, when I do my after I finish the reading, I'd like to take a little time and thank such important people. Okay. I want to start by saying that I didn't start out with the idea of writing a book. Certainly not a book on short stories. When I was a kid and I learned to read, I can truly say I was in heaven. It was the most wonderful way to escape poverty, to escape life, that kind of thing. And so when I was a kid, I wrote poetry, and I was clearly in awe of all those that could write and all those books that I read. And I really thought, what a wonderful thing, and what a wonderful person that was that wrote that. Now, I'm looking back now at some 65 years plus, and I've written my own book. I've written my own book. Anyway, these 22 short stories that are in this book are loosely based on my life as a child and into adulthood. I discovered that the stories that I've written that are based on a thread of truth have come from my encounters in life, seem to have turned out to be the easiest for me to write. And I hopefully you'll find that it'll be enjoyable to the readers also. Now, I must confess, I'm pretty good at making up stuff too. So these are fictional short stories, okay? About 10 years ago was when I actually started writing the odd short story. And over time, it led me into writing more stories. And then it segued into a collection of short stories. And with the encouragement of my darling Leah and my writers group, my wonderful writers group right here. Not me. PK's here, which is, he's supporting his wife. I think that's wonderful. Yeah. These are the folks that helped me transform these short stories into a book. Now, Leah would not let me take a story to my writers group, and the writers group is there to help me critique it and, that kind of thing. She wouldn't let me out of the house until she had critiqued it and critiqued it and critiqued it. 10,000 times would be an understatement. And if anybody knows me, and lots in this room do, she's not a girl to mince her words. My career as a registered nurse, followed by a labor relation officer position, and finally my own culinary herb business, actually has provided a lot of background for my short stories. In addition, my family in Nova Scotia provided storyline for many of my tales. And I'm hoping that my family in Nova Scotia are listening to this tonight, because we're talking 10 o'clock as opposed to 7 o'clock. So I'm kind of excited about that. Now, my book does target women over the age of 40. And there's not hardly any over the age of 40. But I have actually thought about it since, and I think there's room for a general target of people, because this story, my readers will learn when they're reading these stories that anyone who was born and raised in poverty, like I was, can make their way in life and can succeed. Young people who read my stories will learn that many years ago, life was a struggle. And for many young people today, life is a struggle. And it is still, like I said, today. And sometimes we don't always have happy endings. So people in general will recognize that life is not always fair. And there are consequences, obviously, to one's actions. But a dose of humor that I've threaded into some of my stories to hopefully bring a chuckle to them. I hope you not only look at it from a serious perspective, but also we'll get a little chuckle out of this. I'm hoping. One thing I will confess is that I didn't know this, but I really love writing short stories. I really, really like that feeling of happiness. I really get happy when I'm writing a story. And that's what I said to you, didn't I? I'm looking at you here. I want to now turn to part of the procedure of book launch is to read some of this work. Isn't it nice to call it? I just loved it. Anyway, this is a story I titled Abby Pierce, and I'm going to read a few pages of it. But and hopefully I'm going to stop at a point where you're going to be done and finish it. You know what I mean? That's the plan of action. Okay. I first saw Abby Pierce at an exercise class 5 years ago. I had no idea how old she was. Could have been anywhere from 50 to 70. Her dark hair had gray streaks throughout and hung limp. Her gym clothes, black t-shirt, black shorts, were wrinkled and ill-fitting. Her legs looked strong and shapely, with little, if any, fat. Her walk was slow, her shoulders hunched. Her face was pale, cheeks were drawn, and her thin arms were folded across her chest, like they held her body together. But it was the haunted look in her blue eyes and the dark circles beneath that I noticed most. Every Saturday she would show up at class. I did not learn her name until 7 weeks later. It seemed one did not talk to newbies until they participated on a regular basis. To my mind, 6 weeks in a row qualified her as a hello or a not. Am I right, guys? Yeah. By the time I spoke to her, she had changed. There was a color to her face, arms and legs, suggestive of being out in the sunshine. Her hair, still dark, with the gray streaks, had been cut short, close to her finely shaped head. Even her gym clothes had changed. She now wore leggings that fitted her legs and hit snugly and a sleeveless top that revealed her still thin arms. Even her walk was faster, and her posture erect. She no longer waited for the class to start with her arms folded across her chest. Instead, she would practice balancing by standing on first one leg and then the other. The odd time I caught a glimpse of her blue eyes. They no longer had that haunted look I first noted, but there was something else in those eyes. Melancholy. One morning, I came to exercise class a half an hour early. I decided it was time to go in. Anyway, it was too hot out. Our gym was a city-run air-conditioned facility that included a walking/running track. Almost immediately, I spied Abby Pierce a few yards ahead of me. She ran fast and steady, and it took me half a round to catch up with her, and that was with me running flat out. You have a good pace, I panted. Have you been doing this long? No, only since I started here. I come early to get a good run in before class. Her voice was soft, but I heard clarity in it. She was flushed, moisture stood out on her forehead. I put her close to 50. Is it all right if I join you? I asked, and had no idea why I wanted to. You mean run with me? She turned her head my way to look at me. She's hardly breathing at all. Yes, if you don't mind. She picked up on the uncertainty in my voice. I don't mind at all. I'm Abby Pierce. She reached out to shake my sweaty hand. I was impressed she didn't flinch. Barbara Watson, I responded. Her hand was dry and smooth. After that, and with few exceptions, we met every Saturday morning, a half hour before our exercise class. Abby Pierce lived in a downtown apartment she had shared with her partner, Carla. Carla had died of breast cancer in February, 2 months before Abby started at the gym. Tears filled her eyes when she told me about it, and I could hear the sorrow in her voice. Carla and I used to go to the farmer's market every Saturday morning. We'd have breakfast and shop. I simply didn't want to go there anymore after losing her. That's why I started coming to the gym. Then she smiled and cleared her throat. As it turned out, it was a good decision, at least physically. I returned her smile when she added, also, I made myself a lovely friend. We did become friends, best friends at that. Abby came over to my house most Saturday evenings, had supper with me and my husband, Herb. Sometimes she would show up with an expensive bottle of whiskey. Sometimes she would insist on making supper or bringing a special dish from a restaurant she and her other friends had tried. She planned a wonderful 60th birthday party for me, and I reciprocated on her 55th. She became part of our family's Christmases, appeared with gifts at every birthday party, and with my 2 adult sons, their wives and children, I think I missed the sentences. Our Christmases appeared with gifts at every birthday party that my 2 adult sons, their wives and children had, and was known as Auntie Ad to the grandchildren. She was one of the noisiest when it came to games with the grandkids. Her wonderful laughter was contagious, and she was always generous with her time and hugs. Occasionally, with my husband as the designated driver, we would go to the casino, lose money, and drink too much. I loved Abby's attitude. She was straightforward, tell it like it is kind of person. But at the same time, she always seemed to know what to say and to do the right and at the right time. Herb and I lost her 8-year-old dog, Freddie, to a ruptured abdominal tumor. It was midnight when we got home from the vet clinic. My heart was broken. And who was there to meet us? But my lovely best friend. I was retired, but Abby was not. She was a defense attorney and had a law firm called Pierce and Associates. Luckily for me, Abby's command of the English language, both written and verbal, was exceptional. I used to tell her she was more correct than the Oxford Dictionary. I aspired to be a writer after I retired, and fortunately for me, Abby agreed to critique and proofread my work. God, she could be brutal. She could be brutally honest. I recall one occasion when she was sitting at my kitchen table, quietly reading one of my short stories. I had just entered the kitchen as she closed the last page. She looked up at me. Barb, what in hell made you think a dog could bring together two old sisters who hated each other since birth? This ending was garbage. Of course, I got my back up and snapped. Why couldn't the dog do that? Dogs are the most loving and gentle of souls. Abby grinned. Darling Barb, I know how much you love dogs. Unfortunately, it's hard to imagine how a dog in the space of, 15 minutes could suddenly change two hardened old women into loving sisters. I wanted to be in the room with her. But as usual, she was right. To preserve my dignity, I said, okay, maybe in this case you've got a point, but I still believe dogs can bring people together. She smiled and said not another word. Abby was also full of praise. She never failed to compliment me on my dedication to writing. If she thought a story was good, subject to word corrections, she told me so. And I was not the only one she applauded. When she spied an acquaintance, she would go out of her way to acknowledge them for something that impressed her. Even an adversary who had presented an excellent argument in a case she had lost, she would compliment. One Sunday evening, Abby and I were lounging on the deck following supper. Herb had gone up north on a fishing trip with his buddies. We were indulging in some wonderful red wine. In fact, we were on our second bottle. When under the clear blue, I asked, you want to see clear, by the way? I just threw that in by mistake. Sorry. I asked, Abby, do you like being a lawyer? She responded immediately. But I wasn't always a lawyer. I used to be a registered nurse. When I moved to Saskatoon, I was still in nursing. And that was when I met Carla. Get out, I said. Yep, I was a nurse for 10 years. It was Carla who suggested I go back to university. She was astute enough to know that a nurse wasn't what I really wanted to be. And so I returned to university and became a lawyer. I recall Abby once saying she was from down east. I assumed that meant Ontario. For some reason, folks in the prairies consider Middle Canada down east. And any place east of Quebec and Ontario is way down east. When I asked where she got her nursing degree, I was surprised to learn it was from McGill University. I didn't realize you were from Quebec, I said. I'm not. I'm actually from Nova Scotia. Notice how we're getting a nice across the whole country here. It just occurred, I'm not at this. I didn't realize you were from Quebec, I said. I'm not. I'm actually from Nova Scotia. At least that's where I started out. Her voice suddenly changed. It sounded harsh. I looked at her, but she was staring beyond me. I wondered briefly whether or not to carry on, but her tone had pulled me in, and I wanted to know more. What do you mean when you started out? How did you end up in Montreal? She sighed, her voice softened, and she directed her gaze my way. My parents sent me there. I was a high achiever at school, and my mother wanted everything from me. She scouted out what she thought was the best university and what was affordable, and I ended up living in the nurse's residence at McGill. I got my nursing diploma, after which I continued on and got my nursing degree. How old were you when you left home? She said nothing at first, as if puzzled by the question. Then she said, I was 16, soon to turn 17. It was my mother who wanted me to be a nurse. I didn't know what I wanted, and I'd like to please her. There was a time I would have done anything for my mother. Abby stared at the lawn beyond the deck. But I got the sense that she wasn't looking at her own shadow stretching beyond the grass, across the grass. I wanted to know more. There was something much deeper here. And that's what I'm gonna read in this one. I'll have a slug of fluid here. This next story is my timing on kids. Sure.
Yes.
The next story is called A Morning Snack. I think I'll put my glasses on. I wondered why I would have trouble sitting. To say I was anxious that April morning would be an understatement. My senses were on full alert and my eyes scoured the streets for any signs of a police car. I was driving much faster than the speed limit. Opal and Pearl, my two dogs, sat calmly on the back seat as if they didn't have a care in the world. My day had started out when I let Opal and Pearl out the back door. They'd been fidgeting like a couple of restless tap dancers. 2 days of warm weather had turned the sunny part of the backyard from drifts of snow to puddles of mucky water. I wasn't concerned about the girls getting messy. Concrete sidewalk led to the sandy area where they had been trained to do their business. Some mornings I would stand in the doorway and wait for them to return. Others, I would close the door and wait for their whine and bark to be let in. That particular morning, I decided to get the newspaper from the mailbox. The headlines blasted that our mayor had been caught stealing funds from the city coffers. That's not really true, of course. I poured myself a cup of coffee, munched a piece of toast slathered in peanut butter, and sat down at the table, anxious to read about the mayor's misdeeds. I took the last sip of my second cup of coffee, folded the newspaper, and glanced at the clock, shocked to realize that an hour had passed. I looked at the dogs' dishes, both brimming with food. It's funny. It was a rare occasion indeed that those bowls had so much as a speck of food in by this time of day. Then it clicked. The dogs were still outside. Why hadn't they barked to be let in? I bolted to the back door, and there they were, standing in the sidewalk, on the sidewalk, tummies, legs, paws covered in mud. I was so relieved to see them, I let them in the house, muck and all. They both went to the dishes, sniffed, and walked away. I didn't give it much thought. I turned to the task of cleaning them up. Mid-sized black German shepherds, Opal and Pearl, were both 7 years old. I had brought them at 6-week-old litter meets. 6 months later, Pearl started having uncontrollable seizures. The veterinarians put her on a daily dose of medication, which helped to control the seizures, but affected other parts of her brain as well. She was a gentle, lovable dog, though slow to learn. Her sister Opal, also gentle and loving, was brilliant. I'm sure I'm not missed. I'd taken them to obedience training. Opal passed with flying colors and much praise. Pearl, on the other hand, failed. Luckily, Pearl was Opal's shadow. If Pearl had to pee, so did Pearl. If Opal sat, so did Pearl. If Opal barked, Pearl did likewise. Pearl did exactly as her sister did. After cleaning the dogs, I headed upstairs to do morning chores. I was in the middle of wiping the bathroom sink when I heard what sounded like a gasping gulp. I peered around the bathroom door and saw Opal and Pearl partway up the carpeted stairs. Their bodies were in spasm, their mouths expelling a thick stream of brown liquid. I watched the slimy sludge hit the carpet and slither down the steps. You guys say that real fast, eh? As Opal turned to go down the stairs, another spasm hit her, and out erupted another vast volume of thick liquid. Pearl followed suit. At the foot of the stairs, they threw up again. This time the secretion was mucus-like and clearer, but just as effectively soaking into the blue-green carpet. Oh, why is it always on the carpet? I carefully picked my way down the stairs to find wet paw prints on the carpet. At the bottom, the prints led to the kitchen and finally stopped at the kitchen table. I knelt and peered at the two dogs tucked together underneath, their heads now turned away. And when I said their names, they wouldn't look at me. Their tails pounded the floor in short, quick strides, their guilty pose. I started the arduous chore of cleaning up. First, I had to scrape the sludge off the carpet. The smell was so overwhelming, I gagged. I rushed to the bathroom, rummaged through the cupboard under the sink, and found a jar of methylated ointment. It was a trick a friend had told me. She said, slap that baby under your nose and you can't smell anything else. She was wrong. I gagged some more. It was all I could do to keep down what was left of the coffee and toast. I'd never known Opal or Pearl to eat their own feces. And believe me, what came out of their mouths was unadulterated shit. Why did they start now? To settle my mind, I stepped out of the house and down the sidewalk to check their outdoor toilet. And as I had expected, I observed two sets of nicely formed stool cradled in the sand, basking in the late morning sun. I made my way back to the house, mind churning. If the girls didn't eat their own stool, then how did they get feces in their stomach? Unless something catastrophic had happened to them and it caused stool to leak into their stomachs from their bowels. My mouth dropped as alarm bells went off in my head. I must get them to the hospital. I dashed in the house, leased up the dogs, grabbed my coat and rushed outside, partially dragging the girls. Damn, got the car keys. Back into the house I scurried, grabbed the keys, whirled around, and slammed the door on my way out. Damn, didn't lock the door. Back I went, opened the door, locked the knob, slammed it again, and darted to the garage. Both dogs were sitting by the garage door. Once inside, I literally picked them up and threw them into the back seat. I pulled into the parking lot of the University of Saskatchewan Small Animal Clinic, ordered them out of the car, and rushed through the clinic doors, loudly declaring, "My dogs are terribly sick. They're vomiting stool." Opal and Pearl stood quietly behind me, showing absolutely no sign of distress. The waiting room was filled with people, some with the pets on their lap, some with animals on the floor next to them, others with no pets at all. All eyes were on me. A receptionist slipped from behind the chest-held counter. She put her hand on my shoulder. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. It's my dogs. There's something terribly wrong. They've just finished vomiting fecal matter." I had some of my wits about me, so I used a more clinical term to define the vomitist. My voice, however, remained loud enough for all to hear. "Come with me," said the receptionist. The girls and I followed through the examining room. "The doctor will be with you shortly. Please ask him to hurry. I'm really worried," I said. Meanwhile, Opal and Pearl commenced a thorough examination of the room, sniffing the floor, the examining table, the bottom of the door, the cupboard under the sink, the legs of two chairs, one of which the receptionist had encouraged me to sit in, but I could no more think of sitting than flying to the moon. I spent the next while pacing, closely watching the girls. We had finished the room check, and now they stretched out on the floor, keeping an eye on me. Finally, the doctor arrived, or so I thought. She introduced herself as a third-year veterinary student. "Student," I said. "I was told a doctor would see my dogs." "Yes, the doctor will see your dogs, but our procedure is to have a student assess the patient first. This is a teaching facility." "I know, but my dogs vomited fecal matter. They shouldn't be doing that." Right, they shouldn't be doing that. It would only happen if they ate fecal matter," she said. "But that's my point," I said. "They didn't eat any." "How do you know?" she asked. I explained that I had found both dogs morning bowel movements in the dumping unit. I explained that I gathered the stool at the end of every day. I went on to say the dogs did not roam freely. I was very definite when I said there was no way my dogs could have eaten another animal's feces. She looked at me. She looked from me to the dogs. What I'm saying is the dogs must have somehow had access to feces. Maybe someone threw some of them over the back fence. She seemed as definite as I'd been. No way, I snapped. I do not have a back alley and my neighbors do not have dogs. The student stared at me for a moment and then said, why don't I check Opal and Pearl over and then get the dogs to join us? I still felt a bit miffed. Did I say that right? Yeah. Miffed, but thought I had better settle down. After all, I was in her territory. Softened my voice. I appreciate that. She was gentle with the girls as she felt their necks, opened their jaws to view gums and teeth, peered in their ears, palpated their abdomens, and took groin pulses. She listened to each chest and belly using the stethoscope. The girls were obliging, but I did get a look from Opal that said, what the hell is she doing? When the student stuck a thermometer in her anus. The student and I were silent throughout the procedure. When she had completed the examination, she made notes on the dog's charts. Then she looked up at me and said, everything is fine. They have good bowel sounds, stomachs are not tender, pulses are good, chests are clear, and they're not running a temperature. But what would cause them to vomit stool if they didn't eat any? I wanted to know. I couldn't help feeling that she was patronizing me. And she shrugged and smiled at me and said, it's a mystery. And we'll have to do the rest. Well, thank you guys so very, very much. How is my time? Am I doing okay?
Just past 7:30.
Ooh, there's some things for the class. I'd like to make some closing remarks, if I may. I have absolutely a number of people that I need to thank. First of all, again, I want to thank you all for coming. I just really appreciate it. And I want to thank all you guys out in, what did I call that? Online land. Hi, Stevie, people in Nova Scotia. Sister, I'm really bad here. Okay. Sister Sue and Brett in Calgary. Brother-in-law Wayne in BC. Oh, all you guys, okay? I would like to extend a big thank you to McNally Robinson and specifically to Alyssa Krapinska. Did I say that?
She nodded it.
Pretty close.
Oh, thank you. For providing an opportunity for writers like me to showcase our work. I really appreciate that. A big thank you to my editor and publisher, Heather Nickel, with from your Nicholsworth Publishing in Regina. She was marvelous and she did a marvelous job and she guided me through this whole process. To Bree McCann. Bree McCann was the one that did the write-up for me, McCann. I'm sorry, Bree. Bree McCann. She did the write-up about me and the Star Phoenix. And she did a wonderful thing. And you should know that Bree is actually a crime reporter. So isn't that amazing? Very versatile, very versatile. I want to say a really big thank you to Natalie Geddes. I hope I know Natalie's watching tonight from Winnipeg. What a marvelous girl you are. She was one of those that really got the ball rolling. She's a best friend to Bree, and these ladies, oh, they're marvelous. She supported me all the way through. So thank you so much, Natalie. I want to say a really rounded thank you to writers and writers in residence at the Saskatoon Public Library for their guidance in helping me become a better writer, and to the Saskatchewan Writers Guild for providing workshops, evaluations, publications to enhance writers' experience, and a special thank you to Dee Hobbs, Oh, I'm gonna blue her name Smith. Is that good enough, Dee? Thank you. Thank you, Norma. Our very, very good friend who is wonderful on the computer. And thank you, family, down all over the place in Canada. For if it weren't for you, some of my short stories wouldn't have been possible. And finally, I want to thank my wonderful, wonderful writing group. Aisha, that's Aisha, Chatty, Judy,
Put your hand up, Judy. There we
Kathy,
go.
Hillary, for the amazing feedback they gave me. We just love each other, don't we? We do. I'm getting support. And to my darling Leah, who was never afraid, unfortunately, to tell me what it's like. Now, do we have time for a question or two, or is there a question or two? You're so enchanted by what I said that you can't wait to home and read it, right? Okay,
I have a question for you, Pam.
yes,
So do you sit down as a habit every day to write?
no,
stuff
I do
you don't?
not, no. And in fact,
Go to the mic. Go to the mic.
do you know what the question was?
No.
Do I sit down every day and do I have a schedule to write on a consistent basis? And did I paraphrase that? No, I don't. In fact, I'm having one hell of a time right now because I'm excited about this. And I like being outside. So I probably do my best writing in the winter. But I will say this, because I am in a writer's group, we have to produce something within a time frame. Because what we do in the writers group is we critique each other's work. But you have to have some work to be critiqued. So it's extremely motivating and encouraging to follow that order. That's a lovely question. Yes, ma'am.
Do you see another group of short stories in the future, or what do you see coming down the road?
Well, actually, I've got a really keen interest in poetry right now. So I have a number of poems that I've written. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with them. I have 8 short stories that I've just completed. And I don't know. I maybe, I don't know. But thank you for the question. Now, as I understand it, Alyssa, if now is this an appropriate time to mention that I'm going to go down there and sit, and if anybody wants me to sign their book.
Yes, did you want to move on for that now, or did you want to take a few more questions?
Oh, there's more questions here. Yes, Dave.
Fictional short story, but the point of telling us about a little bit about origin. So I'm wondering why you're not writing about it.
Well, I am writing a little bit of nonfiction. I'm writing about when I was a nurse up north, and there was a plane crash, and what my involvement of that was. Now, I might be of a generation here, you younger, older folks. Do you guys remember Martin Hartwell? Have you ever heard of Martin Hartwell? Yeah, well, I was the nurse on duty when they brought him in. And I'd written a short story about that. But I'm not quite sure what to do with it yet. So yes, and also one of my writer's friends is encouraging me to look at something along that line. So anyway, I don't know. Thank you, Dee, for the question. Kathy.
I saw a hand over there.
Oh, you were pointing to someone. Is there a question over this way? You have to leave? Okay. She has to leave, so let's do some signing.
Fran,
One more thing. Look at you guys.
So much, just a sweetheart.
No, it's. I know. Thank you so much. Oh, my goodness.
Give me a hug, girl. Give me a hug. Thank you, thank you.
Well done. Very good.
Can I give this to you?
Sure. You have to get it back. Oh, those folks, you guys know are my writers group? You all know that. I need that here. So now I guess I'm gonna sign right now because she has to leave. I don't have,
Yeah, I got,
you got a pen?
yeah, I got one.
All right, at this point, I'll invite everyone to line up to meet Fran shortly here. And we've got copies for sale just on that table there. And thank you all for joining us and have a great evening.
Beautiful.
Oh,